I wanted to start off though today, Ben, with the big breaking news: done deal, Henderson to Ajax. This kind of didn't come out of nowhere, but it's been big breaking news this morning. What's the latest in regards to that?
Yeah, first of all, apologies to the chat for my lateness. Part of that was down to the Jordan Henderson deal. And as you say, it's almost done with Ajax. The way that this has actually come about is that Henderson's self-representing. So when he moved to Al Ittifaq, Trent Alexander-Arnold's brother Tyler did that deal. For this particular bit of business, Henderson is out there, not entirely by himself because he's got advisors, but ultimately he's self-representing. And that has allowed him to line up a deal first with Ajax and then go to Al Ittifaq. And he wanted to do it that way, almost for some kind of deniability, because when the news came out there that he wanted to leave, Henderson knew that he had to have something concrete to bring back to Al Ittifaq. Otherwise, there was always a danger that he showed his hand and still stayed at the club. So Al Ittifaq had known for probably the last 10 days that Jordan Henderson was considering an exit, but they'd not been told directly. And that was the key step, as I reported exclusively a few days ago. Henderson was due back in Abu Dhabi. And even though it was only for a few days, he had to go there. And it's Abu Dhabi because it's a mid-season training camp, because Ittifaq don't have a game until the middle of February. So Henderson met Steven Gerrard and the sporting director, Mark Allen, and he told them on Monday that he was exploring options. And at that point still, Ittifaq said that they didn't want to loan him or sell him and that they hadn't had any approaches or even inquiries. Henderson then said that if something couldn't be reached, he would consider going public and confirming that he wanted to leave Saudi Arabia. And then it got a little bit difficult because Ittifaq responded, stating very clearly that if he went public, it didn't matter what he lined up, nothing would be sanctioned. And I would say it was relatively tense on that Monday evening into Tuesday morning. Then there was a second meeting. And then finally, the club president, Samit Al-Mishal, got involved, and it was much more amicable. And it was stated that if Henderson had lined up Ajax on his side, even though Ittifaq hadn't received any form of offer, they would be prepared to entertain with Henderson a termination of contract. And that is being finalized now. And ultimately, there's a saving for Ittifaq on the wages. They're not as high as many report, but it's still 8 million net a year. So there's a saving of the second half of the wages, which free up funds. But Henderson is also contributing. And this is where legally it's quite interesting, because we would associate an add-on with a club-to-club negotiation. But if everything goes according to plan with the finalization at Ajax, and then Henderson succeeds under certain circumstances, he'll owe Ittifaq a form almost of bonus, which means that the total contribution from Henderson is going to be quite costly, because in addition to that, by not staying 2 years, he also has to pay taxes as well. So his Ajax contract is expected to be 1.5 years, possibly with an option. The wage at Ajax will be roughly a 75% pay cut. And that's based upon taking the 8 million number of wages down to total possible earnings at Ajax of about 2 million, give or take. And obviously both in this context are then taxed, because the 8 million parts of which he's already earned will now have to be declared. So it's not like he just pockets tax-free money for 6 months. He now has to pay back certain things. Sources in Saudi indicate he won't have to pay things back like a sign-on fee or a relocation or anything like that. But that can actually be quite typical in Saudi Arabia under normal employment. When you only stay for 6 months, you often have to give a lot back that you're given up front, because they might pay for the housing, they might give you a relocation fee, even things like furniture allowance and stuff like that can be quite high numbers that you often have to return. None of that will happen with Henderson, but he'll still owe money back. And now he goes on to Ajax. And then I think we're going to see split narratives, because the Saudi side insist that he's happy in Saudi, and this is more about football and not playing until February and worrying that he won't make the Euro squad. And of course, you would expect them to say that. And obviously, from the Henderson side, it's clear that he hasn't fully settled. It's tough, though, because I lived out in the Middle East for the best part of 7 years. And I was in Saudi, I was in Qatar, I was in Bahrain, I was in the UAE. And it does take 6 months to get used to language, culture, climate. And when you're a footballer, it's more extreme because you go from morning training to night training. His first 5 games were in 40-degree heat. So I think there's two sides to this. Now, Henderson will, to some extent, push the unhappy or unsettled in Saudi side. But what we, I think, need to add is that there will probably be I'm going to call it gagging clause, although that's maybe not the right terminology or doesn't quite have the right tone to it. But there will be some kind of amicable agreement whereby I don't think Henderson will be allowed to come out and say that he didn't enjoy his time in Saudi Arabia. I also think, in fairness to Al Ittifaq, there needed to be more due diligence from Henderson, because it's a great club, genuinely, but it's not a big club. It's not one of the PIF controlled ones. So Henderson should have known the size of the stadium. He should have known the facility.
Yes.
He should have known the location. He should have known everything, because that's what you do when you take any job. And I don't think he did his due diligence. And the reason for that is because 4 days after he arrived, he was unhappy with the gym, but he should have known what the gym was like. And again, Al Ittifaq went out of their way to buy him a new gym. And when I say buy Henderson a new gym, the way the story is told is he literally sat with the club and said what equipment he wanted, and they pretty much ordered it on the spot. So I think Ittifaq have gone out of their way to try and make a success of it, but it just wasn't a fit for whatever reason, whether that's based on football, whether that's based on Euros, or, as many will suspect, because he took a large payday and didn't know what he was in for and didn't enjoy the experience. We're going to hear a range of different narratives, but the reality is the contract is terminated, and it looks like he's very close in the next few days to joining Ajax.
Yep, and look, I think whenever a league is not starting afresh, because it existed already, but the Saudi league is trying to go to another level, there's always going to be teething problems with some people. I think maybe thinking of the money before looking at the actual situation. We've seen it before in England when Sol Campbell joined Notts County. It didn't take him long to go, actually, I just don't want to sort of do this and be there. But look, he's going to join Ajax now. It looks pretty much like that's done, and we move on. Viewers, make sure like buttons have been hit. Any questions you've got for Ben, please make sure you send them in. Another player who there's a lot of rumors that he doesn't want to remain in Saudi, which is why I think the Henderson story is true. He's been linked with Arsenal. He's been linked with Man United. There's stories today in the UK that Benzema has been offered to Chelsea. What's your understanding of his situation, and how likely is he to join the West Londoners as a striker this January?
Well, some might sort of assume that Henderson catalyzes a mass exit, but actually, and ironically, Henderson's departure might make it harder for Benzema, because it's common sense that the Saudi deal makers are not going to want a big exodus only 6 months in. And with only a couple of weeks left in the window, Benzema would really have to try and push. But the two situations are different, because Henderson's dealing with a smaller club and directly with the president, whereas with Benzema, were he to want to move away in the next 2 weeks, it would need ministry approval, it would need PIF approval, it would need direct green light from Gallardo, the manager, and Planes, the new sporting director, all on the same page. And if any one of those doesn't want it to happen, then Benzema will have to see out the season. But Benzema was brought to Al Ittihad because they were the Saudi champions. That's why they got the priority, and because they wanted him in the Club World Cup. So the fact the Club World Cup has now passed and Ittihad are struggling this season, they're not going to defend their title. They're not going to easily be able to guarantee anything regarding Asian Champions League. It's more likely than not, in fact, that they don't qualify this season for the Asian Champions League based on the table at the moment. So it again makes for quite a flat second half of the season. And therefore, Benzema may also feel like he wants to play at a higher level or in more competitive games over the course of the next 6 months. But it's a much harder one because it's one of the bigger clubs. So then you're dealing far more with the politics. And if any one of those key stakeholders within PIF and the ministry in particular, and directly within the club as well, have any pushback, it's a big, big problem. Now, obviously, when I say PIF and being wider than the club, PIF also control the club, but it's two different sets of people. You've got PIF and the ministry as wider deal makers thinking about the whole league. And then in addition to that, you've got those that actually are running Al Ittihad. So you need a green light from almost two sets of PIF people, the bigger picture PIF, and then in addition, the club specific PIF. plus, as I say, your manager, your sporting director, and ultimately the Ministry of Sport. And I just think that the optics of a Benzema exit at this stage are not going to be a good look for the Saudi Pro League, to the point where sources say there's going to be pushback. I also think that Benzema's not doing what Henderson's doing. I know some people feel like he stayed in Mauritius and missed a Dubai training camp in order to try and facilitate an exit, but there was a cyclone there as well. And if the bad weather, as Benzema has now said, is the only reason why he missed that camp, then he'll return. So this notion of a Premier League move, I think, is premature. I'm told that he's not been offered to Chelsea despite links. Chelsea are still assessing their options. They might, it's true, want an older option that can be a stopgap, and then they'll move in the summer. Or they might just stick with Amanda Broja and then let Nicholas Jackson come back from the Africa Cup of Nations. We also can't rule out them coming back in for Antonio Nusa either. So Chelsea had a recruitment meeting, I believe yesterday or the day before, and that was their second one in the space of just a few days. And Pochettino's gone off for a couple of days off. And I think the recruitment team's plan is to kind of lock in a singular target if they are to move for a striker in this window, because it won't be Victor Osimhen and it won't be Ivan Toney either. And Victor Gyökeres, who reports in Portugal suggested had been presented with an opportunity to join for about 85 million euros. That's got no legs to it as far as I'm told. Chelsea sources are very clear that they're not in for that particular player in this window. So again, we're going to have a lot of rumor about Benzema, but at the moment, I don't think, unlike Henderson, he's got a concrete offer that he can actually turn to, even if it is true that he wants to leave the Saudi Pro League. So any Benzema exit is going to be much, much harder than Henderson, especially because Henderson's gone. And when you consider that if there were politics around a Henderson departure that he was able to navigate, then times those politics by 1,000 for any possibility of Benzema being able to leave mid-season.
Which makes perfect sense. And as you say, until a concrete offer comes in from an Arsenal or a Chelsea or a Man United, it makes it even harder.